Hi there, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview successful business leaders and industry experts to help you grow your business. I truly believe that sometimes single insight can completely change your business directions and allow you to achieve your business goals. In this episode, my guest is founder of a Great Results Teambuilding. He's a keynote speaker, facilitator, working with the team leaders to build more positive and profitable workplace culture with improved communication and accountability. He's also an author of several training programs and several books, Staying Coachable and 10 Commandments of a Winning Teammate. Now, during our discussion, we talked about many different topics around the business, leadership, and organization culture. And Sean outlined some of the challenges and opportunities ahead for business leaders for team building to impact our organization culture. He also talks about why it's important for business leaders to stay coachable and personal development and to get better and help the teams to get better. He also outlined the approach. What can business leaders do to help the team during this time while everybody's working on a decentralized environment or some sort of hybrid environment? What kind of activities you do? How do you approach team building while you're working in a hybrid environment? So if you like this discussion, don't forget to send us a thumbs up. Until next time, please welcome my guest, Sean Glaze. Hi guys, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. Today my guest is someone very special, Sean Glaze. Sean, the topics, your area expertise in leadership, team building, all of these skill sets become so important for the last couple of years where I see it, and it's been challenged in many different directions. So first of all, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Oh, I appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to sharing some helpful information with your listeners.
Welcome. So to talk about what do you see that biggest changes over the last few years where we just gone through, Sean, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of pushbacks in the market, and a lot of changes, on a personal level, professional levels, or corporate level. Where you see some of those biggest changes, Sean, for the last few years?
Well, that is obviously a loaded question. We could talk for hours on that, and I'm sure that your listeners have certainly in the last 24 months with all the COVID fun, gone through a lot of different challenges with their teams and with leadership specifically. The conversation I have when I'm talking with event planners for conferences or for team building events, and even in some of my coaching conversations, have really focused upon two major areas. One is obviously what do we do to retain our talent, to make sure we keep good people, and the other is what do we do to become basically kind of a talent magnet and build in some of those loyalty anchors to attract people and to become an exceptional culture where people can thrive and hopefully become better teammates and get better results because of the environment that we've built. And I think that those are very much intertwined, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Was that challenge for the last few years, Sean? How we attract talent? How do we manage the talent, and how do we build that companies in such a way that we retain talent? Was that skill set how business leaders approached that before COVID was challenged a little bit during this last couple of years?
Yeah, well, I think that there are a number of things that have remained consistent. And when I talk about loyalty anchors for leaders and organizations to focus on, obviously pay is one of those things that's going to attract or sustain people's commitment. But sometimes you can't, change the range of pay that's available for a certain role. And there are other things that you can absolutely focus on that make a job and that make an employee or a team member a little bit more committed and engaged in that role. Things like obviously purpose, making sure that you do a great job of having that compelling common goal, that meaningful mission that people feel like they're serving, making sure that you're putting them with people, because the quality of our relationships, if somebody has a friend at work, they become significantly more invested and productive. I think giving them a sense of praise, making sure that you're showing recognition and appreciation for their efforts and acknowledging and letting them feel seen. And also giving them a sense of growth, what are we doing to continue to grow and improve, and let them see progress in their skill set and in their development as somebody who is basically, in a lot of times when they look in the mirror, an individual contractor in a lot of senses. And so absolutely the idea of remote work or hybrid situations over the last couple of years has been kind of a wild card that's been thrown into the deck that has really shifted a lot of the way that we manage. But I think that the things that people depend on to be fully committed team members and to be more engaged have remained consistent.
Very interesting. So one of the item, Sean, for my feedback, for talking to a lot of business leaders on ongoing basis. So one of the items I've seen that all of that starts from a top leadership in a company, whether it's the CEO or the president of the company, right? So they get up a mindset. And your book, one of the book was very interesting that, coachable mindset. If you can talk about what is this coachable mindset, and when I talk to a lot of business leaders, it's easy to stay coachable when it was a little bit tough time when you're trying to grow. But when you have an easy growth coming in your way and you have an easy time, that's when you let go of the coachable. But that's when you need most coachable. So how you stay consistent on that. So I see a lot of business leaders get challenged. I get challenged with that as well. So my company, I can use my personal example. When we're doing everything right, we're growing, we're scaling. You seems to think that you got the confidence, you're doing everything right, and you let go those, some of those blind spot. And when you struggling with some of those challenges, that's when you look for coaching, right? So if you can talk about what is a coaching mindset and what business leaders need to do to stay coachable.
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned something at the front end of that question, Gurmeet, that I think is absolutely essential for leaders to understand, and that is, when I work with organizations and they bring in somebody for a teamwork speaker to do team building or to work on culture, all of those things are going to be symptoms of leadership. Your culture is evidence of your leadership, and culture is repeated behaviors. And one of those behaviors, like you mentioned, is whether it is you looking at the person in the mirror and needing to improve yourself, or you obviously realizing that you need to develop your people to get better results. Coaching becomes part of that equation. The issue is, in my background, obviously, before I started working with organizations as a speaker and coach and facilitator, I was a high school basketball coach. That's how I kind of came to a lot of the lessons that I learned about building team cultures before I extrapolated and translated those into more corporate situations. Mm-hmm. And as you might imagine, not every high school athlete is open to feedback, is open to being accountable. And the reality is that, leaders and managers see the exact same thing in their teams, and adults are just big kids that carry with them a lot of the same fears and a lot of the same frustrations, a lot of the same, reluctance to appreciate and to apply feedback. And so they end up, instead of being greedy and grateful for ideas and insights on their own improvement, they end up basically pushing that away and being very much reluctant is sometimes a kind word, but they can sometimes be almost aggressively resistant to change and to feedback. And I think one of the things that I learned much later in my career than I like to admit, in working with my athletes and now translating that to working with team members, is obviously command and control ends up obviously being an issue that can sometimes push people away. And when you push hard, sometimes people push hard back. And what the book Staying Coachable seeks to do, and each of my books is obviously a parable which shares a story that hopefully provides some valuable takeaways and insights that the readers can apply to their teams and organizations. But Staying Coachable is a book that addresses specifically that, because every team has people that need to improve that are sometimes not as excited about having those feedback or accountability conversations. And so how can I, as an individual, and even more importantly, how can I as a leader or a manager help my team to be more accepting? Because absolutely everybody needs a coach. The problem is not everybody's coachable. And the book basically outlines the relationship that needs to occur, which is, rather than being command and control, how can you actually be far more curious and use questions? And there are 4 specific questions and kind of steps in the book that I think we need to follow to help people become more coachable, so that they do get not just more willing to, but almost excited about the improvement that they can enjoy. Wow,
that's such a critical point, Sean. It is, you let go sometime. You gotta, I think it takes time to build that kind of mindset over the time that you need to stay in that. You let go, then you gotta go back to this to the same. So what can business leaders do if instead of being curious, building that skill set? I understand it's a lot of work on yourself. You gotta work on yourself before you can teach your team as well, right?
Absolutely. And
so
the
what
first
can
person, yeah, and to jump into that particular idea is, I'll tell attendees or participants at my events that a lot of what I'm going to share is like deodorant. Everybody believes the person next to them needs it more than they do, because we'll always hear something and say to ourselves internally, man, Bob at the office really needs to hear this. Instead of thinking about how powerful it would be if we applied and took advantage of that same idea or insight and made that part of our habits. And I think that staying coachable is exactly the same way, that we become better leaders when we apply the same insights and ideas that we want our people to adopt. And those 4 steps that I share in the book are really the result of catalyst questions. The first being, obviously, what is your hunger? What is it that you want to achieve? Where do you want to be? What is that goal that you have? Because if there's nothing that I want, then I have no reason to change from my complacent circumstances. If I don't have something in the cabinet that I'm hungry for, I'm not going to get out of my comfortable chair. But it's only when I remember, oh my goodness, there's Oreos or there's Nutter Butters, there's something that I really want, I'm going to actually get up and move from being comfortable and complacent to being committed to change.
One is doing the work on yourself, Sean. Definitely, we talk about business leaders. That's where everything starts. At least you have a control over it. You can control it. You can work on yourself. It is a long process. It's a hard work, but the business leaders don't have a choice. They have to go through the work. But then, how do you teach your team to also do the same? I think that's another skill set, right? So, can you teach your team to do the same work on themselves as well and be example? So, listen, this is what we got to do to become those leaders.
Yeah, I think that getting people to do work on themselves starts first and foremost with you being a tremendous example of being vulnerable and being transparent and being honest about your limitations and weaknesses and your desire to improve those, and admitting, hey, I'm imperfect. Hey, here's where I made a mistake. I want to make sure I continue to get better for you guys so I can serve and support you better. And that demonstration and example by a leader, I think, is a tremendous piece of the puzzle. But specifically for any individual leader or teammate, I think that our willingness to work on ourselves is really the third step of staying coachable. If the first step is being hungry and having that, goal or something that you want to achieve, well, the second step is identifying where are you now and what are your present numbers and what are your current productivity and results, and then realizing that there is a gap between those two. And if I can acknowledge that where I want to be and where I am are two very different places, well, it's that gap in between that creates that sense of need, where people then, in acknowledging that gap, begin to be far more willing to seek out something outside themselves and their current understanding.
So let's talk about some of the habits that make you that coachable. One of your book, Sean, what was 100 habits, I guess, right? So you outline 100 habits in it, and the people's profile. I thought it was great. It's a great book. There's a lot of good habits, a lot of lessons learned from people as well. So if you talk about, what are some of those habits that those business leaders have, or what you see that helps them to stay coachable and do work on themselves. So if you can highlight, some of those habits that the you saw was critical that people need to adopt.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, and I'm hoping that this makes sense for your audience as well. I think that staying coachable really consists of 4 different steps, and that's something that we as leaders want to first be an example of, so that we are transparent and vulnerable and admit mistakes and recognize that our imperfections are opportunities for us to improve and be better in supporting and serving our teams. And if we can do that, then they're going to be far more willing to emulate that type of behavior and be humble. And I think that the 4 things that you see that lead people to be more coachable and to become better teammates are, first, having that hunger, having that compelling common goal, understanding what it is you want to achieve. The second thing is identifying where are you now, being honest about what are your current numbers and your present situation, and then recognizing that there's a difference between those two. And if there is a gap between where I am and where I want to be, it's that gap that inspires me to look outside myself for ideas to help me to be better. And ultimately, that third step is humility, and it's admitting a weakness that maybe you've been unwilling to acknowledge before. And it's only after somebody, again, my background being basketball, it's only after that player acknowledge, you know what, my shooting form isn't as good as it needs to be. I need to actually allow you to coach me to be better so I can be a better shooter. That's going to allow them to achieve the goal they have, which might be to be recruited or play at the next level. And it's the same way for your team. If they want to be better salespeople, they might recognize, here's where I want to be, and this is where I am presently. And it's that gap that gives them the opportunity to demonstrate humility by seeking out a mentor or somebody that can provide the teaching or the advice or the skill that they might presently lack. And then obviously the last thing, as you mentioned, is how do you apply that? Well, that's habits, changing our habits. What are you going to do differently or more consistently in the future that maybe you haven't beforehand? And those first three steps are meaningless unless you change your habits. And staying coachable is about, can you be consistent in implementing those habits that you've identified after you were, hungry for, here's my goal, and after you were honest about, here's where my past performance has been, and after you've been humble enough to ask for assistance, will you commit to the habits that will allow you to over time change your results and become the teammate you want to be?
So those gaps you identify, Sean, in a fourth step, usually what your experience been, those gaps are usually by change, are they big enough that, you can still achieve, because everybody's going to have a different gaps, right? So, in a teams, you're going to have a different gap. So how do you bring those gaps that, what one couple items we can fix that applies to everybody in a team? It's not only one person, is it a person to person you're looking for a gaps, or are you looking for as a team gaps?
Well, and I think that, the best thing that I did as a coach was we implemented one-on-ones to improve our team. Now in basketball, you can play one-on-one with a competition, but that's not the one-on-one that made us better as a program, that makes teams better regardless of injury. The one-on-ones that I'm talking about are you having those 15 or 20-minute conversations with your individual team members every couple of weeks or every month at the very least, to make sure that you're checking in and keeping a pulse on how are they doing as people, how are they doing as teammates, where is the progress they're making, where are the problems or challenges, and how can you be of support to help them in not just identifying priorities for next steps, but holding them accountable for and encouraging them and equipping them with what they might need to be successful. And I think that a large part of that is the connection and the trust that is established by curiosity and a sincere desire to build a relationship and to show appreciation for the person and their background and skill set. But a lot of that is also establishing enough trust so that they do feel comfortable in sharing some of those difficulties so you can assist them in overcoming them. And I think that same four-step process of helping them to identify what is their goal for this next quarter, for this next year, where are they at, where have their present numbers been, and how can you help them to close the gap from where they are to where they want to be? Because ultimately, you don't have to always have all the answers, but if you can bring to them some good questions and give them resources where they can begin to improve their skill set, then they're going to be that much more successful, but they're going to be that much more committed to engaging as part of your team because they feel like they're a small part of something larger than themselves.
Was there one or two habits that you saw from your experience, Sean, was more important over the other ones? Any thoughts on that from your experience? That was there a couple of habits that you thought if some of the business leaders, if they adopt this, they definitely see a better result, or any favorite habits out of those 100 habits I think you documented?
Well, I think one of the habits in that compilation book that you're mentioning, it's what are the 100 habits of successful leaders, and I was able to contribute one, and I think that the one I contributed was about staying coachable. But if I were to suggest, hey, here's a habit that every leader or manager should commit to from starting today moving forward, it's to have better one-on-one conversations with your team members. That's what really turned around the programs that I worked with. And instead of it just being me as a coach and them as a player and them being an X or an O in the midst of running a play, it was them being able to develop more in terms of leader and in terms of taking ownership of their role for what the team was seeking to achieve, because I'd taken the time to really get to know and appreciate and care about them as a person. And I think that as a leader, having those weekly or every couple of week check-ins with those one-on-one conversations is absolutely vital for your team to remain healthy, especially in a remote or hybrid circumstance where you don't have that face-to-face opportunity to interact. To really carve out time and to be intentional about scheduling one-on-ones. And I've actually gotten, this is something I'll be more than happy to share on my website and my teamwork toolbox for leaders and teams. I've got basically a template for here's what your remote meeting can look like to be more successful. Here's what a one-on-one meeting should look like to make sure that you are successful in having those conversations that allow your people to continue to stay coachable and grow.
Mm-hmm. Where you see this one-on-one time, what do you see the business leaders are, definitely you got to be a little bit more creative around it, because, not everything can be done on a Zooms, now everything's opening. So where are you seeing some of those, the initiatives people taking? Are they still doing on a Zoom or meeting or is it in person now, just over the lunches or coffees? Where do you see people being creative and what are people doing to stay in this one-on-one communication?
Well, and I think that obviously depends upon your circumstance. If you're an organization that is back to in person, having those face-to-face meetings and giving people a sense of not just your time, but your attention and your interest in those conversations in the midst of an office conversation is unbelievably powerful. But I don't believe necessarily in Zoom fatigue. I believe in bad Zoom fatigue, because there's certainly a lot of bad meetings and bad conversations and bad moments in Zoom. But if we are engaged, if we're involved, we're having a conversation with somebody that we are interested in and connected to, that's not going to be a bad connection. You can absolutely have connection and trust. Those things are not dependent upon proximity or geography. I think they're dependent upon intention and execution of, are you demonstrating that you are somebody who is sincerely curious instead of, again, just giving me commands and trying to, micromanage perhaps. And so that sense of having better one-on-ones, it can be done in person or remotely. But I think the idea of having a better one-on-one comes down to, what does the template of that meeting look like? How familiar have you really gotten with that teammate? Do you know about their family? Do you know about their hobbies? Do you know about some of their past, what their background might be, what their desires are, what their challenges are specific to their circumstances? And then what are those skills that they need to contribute, and how can you help them do that more effectively based upon their role on the team? And I think that taking all that into account and being more of a person-to-person connection and making it a check-in where you do, again, offer, what can I do after touching base on these other items? What can I do now to help you through these challenges, the one or two that we've identified? And really, I think that the best leaders ultimately become really good coaches. And instead of sharing commands, they become really adept at sharing questions that allow their teammates to take more ownership and have more autonomy.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Sean. Bad meetings are bad meeting, whether it's on electronic media, Zoom or in a person, right? So, it's I think you're absolutely right. Intent at a meeting and what happens in a meeting is definitely, if it's an engaging meeting and you enjoy it, definitely it doesn't really matter how you conduct the meeting. But I know the one-on-one time, I think this is so critical. I know a lot of colleagues, business leaders are, they're taking a different approach, whether it's just doing a lunch over Zoom or a meeting in person. You got to be creative, what works for you. But I think that's such especially during the COVID time, this one-on-one became more important, if not less important, that so much happening people with the, personal life, financially, health-wise, mental health-wise. That's a big issue in Canada. I'm not sure where you at. We're dealing with a lot of high numbers of mental health issues with the kids a lot and with the adults. So time like that, you don't know what's happening with the people other side. So one-on-one time at least allow you to have the conversation. What are you up against? What have you been challenged with? Let me see if I can help you with that as well.
in that sense of support, whether it's an in-person team, because you can be at an office and still feel lonely and disconnected. You can be a remote teammate and feel unbelievably connected and supported based upon those conversations and interactions and relationships that are intentionally built. And actually, I just yesterday was working with a group speaking at an event for them. And what's interesting is we had a very similar conversation, Gurmeet, in that we talked about the importance of one-on-ones, and that one of the most dangerous things a leader can do that sabotages morale and connections and commitment and engagement is to see those one-on-ones as something that is easily deleted or canceled. Oh, well, I've got something more important. I've got to do X. Let me call Johnny or Susie and let them know I'm going to have to cancel our one-on-one. Well, as soon as you do that, you're communicating to that person who is going to obviously say, okay, no problem. But you're communicating to them that that conversation, that interaction, that their development and support is less important than something else that they probably don't even know about. And so for you to build in that sense of valuing your people and developing your people and supporting your people, those one-on-ones, I think, need to be really one of the most important things you schedule on your calendar. And just as importantly, when you're having that weekly or monthly team meeting, I think that every remote meeting, just like every in-person meeting for leaders, needs to include two things before you get to any content. Before you have any content in the meeting, the two things that every leader needs to include is, first, what can you do to connect your people? To ask a silly question, to give people a chance to go around and share, whether it's in chat at the very least, or person to person, and give them 10 seconds or 15 seconds to share their response. So there is a sense of personality and contribution and connection and appreciation for the people. I think connection is unbelievably important. And the other thing is celebration. What can you actually put a highlight and spotlight on that's going to be an example of the values that you and your team have committed to that look like a behavior? So, hey, I just want to take a moment and really celebrate what Julie did last week with our client so-and-so. Here is what we say is one of our values, but here's where it actually was acted out, and this is what it looks like. And I want to make sure we commend Julie, because what it is that you choose to specifically reward and recognize as a leader, those are the things you're going to see repeated by your other teammates. And if you can take a moment at the beginning of a meeting to connect your people in some way and to celebrate something that's going to be an example of the values that you want to instill, then your team is going to be far more focused and connected, and the content begins to be a whole lot more powerful once you've taken care of the celebration and connection.
Very interesting. Sean, if I can take a little bit of business owner's point of view, there's one-on-one time, and I'm speaking a little bit from experience, a little bit from, I know a lot of colleagues that are there, and I want to get your thoughts on it. So one-on-one time is very important for the team. We already talked about it. This is critical. You got to do that. But it takes quite a bit of time off your calendar. And a lot of business leaders, they have large teams where they got to figure out how to do that. When you have a large team, you're not going to be able to spend a lot of time on and they also got to scale. What we've gone through for the last few years, we also got to scale back to businesses. We also got to find a new way. And some of the businesses I know, business leaders I know, whether they have to either they have to find new way of delivering services, or they have to reinvent the products. So a lot of stress, a lot of time commitment there as well. So how do they go about it? Because you're not gonna, you don't want to cancel on your people. Definitely you want to spend one-on-one time, and it's a burnout for them as well, right? So because you're spending a lot of time on one-on-one, it takes a lot of time and energy from you, and the same time that you got to commit to the business. So it is a hard work. But what do you see that how people finding that, how do I can still achieve that when I'm struggling with the time is my running against me? I'm trying to keep up with it.
No, that Aaron is obviously the most important question for leaders to ask themselves is, how am I going to dole out my time? How am I going to basically make commitments on my calendar that are going to have the best results for my team? And I've had this conversation in the past, just in talking about strategy versus culture, because I was somebody the first few years of my coaching career, Gurmeet, and many of your listeners will be able to identify with this, that was 100% focused upon strategy. I was all left brain, logical. We're going to do, here are the plays, here are the inbounds plays, here's the defense, here's the skills that we're going to need to implement. And it was all about strategy. And our team completely face planted. We had such an unbelievably unsuccessful season, not because of lack of talent, but because the kids really weren't bought in, regardless of the fact that it was really good strategy. The strategy wasn't implemented well. And I talk to leaders all the time about the fact that where I became a better leader, where our team began to overachieve, was when I had given attention to strategy, but I began to give more attention to culture. Strategy is what you know your people need to get done.
Yeah.
Culture is going to determine how well your people do it. And it's their connections and commitment to a goal and to the people around them that become your culture. And that culture determines how accountable they're going to be, how much trust they have in the person that depends upon them and that they depend on. And I think culture is unbelievably vital in terms of an agreement for your success. Now, here's the question that leaders need to ask. How willing are you to invest time and energy and resources in culture instead of just strategy? Because I had to take time away from shooting drills. I had to take time away from inbounds plays and from defensive drills. I had to take time away from the strategic stuff to invest it in the culture stuff. But what I found was for every minute that I invested in culture, our strategy got better. And our kids were better at implementing stuff because I'd focused on the culture. And I think there are two answers to the question that you shared. The first answer is you don't need more time, you need better priorities. And I think that's such a powerful quote. And we're only going to have the amount of time we have. What we need to do is to address what are our priorities, because I don't think that as you scale to a larger team, you can maintain the exact same priorities. Certainly culture becomes important, but how you build that culture changes, because how you build culture as your team grows is you learn to delegate. And one of the issues that I have in talking with a number of leaders in coaching conversations is that willingness to delegate. And how do you actually choose who you need to delegate to and how you're going to delegate that and what you're going to do and when you're going to check on to make sure that things are being done well and that you're getting the results that you need, but you're also developing people by delegating to them. And I'm only going to grow the people on my team if I give them responsibilities that allow them to step into those larger shoes. And I think that oftentimes that sense of being willing to delegate, hey, if I've got a team of 8 or 10, I can handle that. If I've got a team of 80, I can't have 80 one-on-one meetings. I need to make sure I'm building leaders within my organization and I'm giving them ownership of 8 team members so that they can end up having those one-on-ones, and then we can have a quarterly check-in perhaps. But I think that ultimately giving yourself an opportunity to delegate and to prioritize your time differently is where you, again, not just allow yourself a little bit more margin in your calendars, but you allow your team to grow far more drastically.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point, Sean. That if you, that the strategy is important, but if you can build a culture in such a way, and the strong culture will always, not only deliver on a strategy, but it will go a couple steps above and beyond as well. Get you there much faster than simply focus on a strategy. It's such a great point. Very interesting. So talk about team building, Sean. I know we talk about habits already. Let's talk about team building. What is business leaders got to do, going forward? How do they start? Some of those items. Say, listen, I need to get a much better, strong, because I think that's what a lot of business leaders lack. This is not a skill set that a lot of business leaders I know they came from technical background. They built the businesses. They're running a bit, companies. We don't specialize in this. There's so many blind spots in this area. So how do business leaders go about how they start learning? What's the best way to build a team building, and how do I go about it?
Yeah, and that is obviously a conversation I have with so many prospective clients is they'll reach out and they'll say, hey, we need somebody to come in, we need something, but we don't know what it is, and we don't know what we're lacking. And I do believe that it's a blind spot, because leaders are successful because of their talent, because of their technical skill. And then you get to a part of your growth as a team or as an organization where people feel disconnected, or different departments feel disconnected. And you need to make sure that you're establishing and strengthening those connections to build trust and to establish relationships that are strong enough to withhold the weight of truth when you need to have difficult conversations. And I think that team building is a big part of that. Here's the issue. People don't necessarily know what they're lacking, but sometimes the reality is, and this is part of me educating a number of clients for me, the term team building is an unbelievably large umbrella And underneath that umbrella term of team building are any number of dozens, if not hundreds of experiences that you might attempt. And not all of them are going to impact and change the behaviors on your team. I think that there is recreational team building, which is, hey, let's go bowling together. Let's go make sure that we're doing, a painting dank together. And I think that those activities can help to do some bonding and doing something where we're going to volunteer together. Those are, again, valuable activities, but they're probably not going to change the interpersonal interactions among your team. They're probably not going to change the productivity or performance of your team. What I found is there's a huge difference between recreational activities and intentional activities. And where I think I've differentiated myself as a facilitator is in the front end, identifying through a survey where teams are in terms of their perspective on leadership and their culture, to identify specific areas that we can focus on in an event that's a half day or a full day experience. But then going in and facilitating activities and challenges and interactions that give people a chance to have an experience that changes their awareness, that impacts their beliefs, and that's ultimately what drives different behaviors and builds a better culture. And I think that sometimes leaders, in an attempt to do what they think is team building, is they're schedule somebody to come online and we're going to have a 30-minute family feud game, or we're going to do something where we're going to go together and volunteer somewhere. And those aren't bad things, but I don't think that those often have the positive impact on changing people's awareness of how their attitude and effort impacts others. And it doesn't create the deeper connections or the trust, or it doesn't equip people to have some of the feedback conversations that more intentional team building activities can.
That's such an interesting point, Sean. Definitely, when I started a business, I used to think that, I know I'm be performing on this level. We can measure it. There's a number of productivity numbers, but that's what the numbers we're trying to meet. But the potential of the team is many, many times higher. And that's where we lack. Even we can tap into a little bit more potential of your team. Definitely, your business changes, your organization changes. Now you deliver different result. But that's to get to the potential. I think that's what you have to go through, the hard work, what you just mentioned. You get to the attention. You need to build the trust. You need to go through all those levels. But I think that's what takes you to the potential. I'm not expert on the subject, but I think that's what takes you to higher on your team's potential than simply just trying to meet some numbers, some quotas that because somebody put it together, we should be doing this. And I think that's very critical what you just mentioned. How do you tap into the potential? How do you find what your team's needs are? What are you trying to do? And how do you get to some of those potential and move the business forward?
Yeah, and specific to what you mentioned, people will focus upon numbers instead of focusing upon their people, because It's people who are responsible for numbers. And it doesn't matter, how big the goal is or how nice your location or building might be. It's the people inside that building that are going to determine if those goals are achieved. And it's because of the collaboration and the connections and the teamwork among those people that those goals will hopefully have a chance to be achieved. And certainly the percentage, the statistic probably hasn't changed. I think it's something like 86% of people have been surveyed saying that that it's the problems with collaboration and communication that have led to workplace failures. And when you can improve communication, we can improve collaboration, and when you can improve those interactions among the members of your team and among the different departments within your organization, obviously the team performance skyrockets, because you've gotten rid of some of those things that maybe sabotage them. And that may be an appreciation of personality styles and recognizing your own tendencies and understanding that what somebody else did wasn't the work of a villain, because sometimes we make negative assumptions in the absence of information. I think building some relationships and giving people a sense of what's important to somebody else and what they need and when they need it and why maybe they've reacted a certain way. I absolutely believe that most accountability that we feel, and all accountability is internal, kind of personal accountability, is the result of empathy. And we only have empathy if we're actually curious enough to consider what somebody else's circumstances and needs and challenges are. And so a lot of that comes as a result of those activities and conversations that people have in the midst of a more intentional team building, because that type of thing doesn't normally come out if you're just doing something that's a recreational hour or two of just a simple, fun, recreational activity.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, you're doing all the hard work on your team, Sean, what you just mentioned. But one thing I've seen over the years is the impact. If you're in a service business or product business, or any business, the impact it makes, when your team in a so vibrant, the impact it makes on a customer as well. So when you have the team that and that's so aligned together on a similar goal, and they all are working, they all you build that trust relationship with each other. So the indirect impact that you make on the customers, I think that's where business leaders need to connect that, that the impacts, on a team is good, but how about my customers? It's making an indirect impact a lot more on a customer. They can feel that energy, and they can sense that as well.
Well, and you think about different organizations, even something as simple as a fast food restaurant. There's a huge difference between going into a Taco Bell or a Burger King and going into a Chick-fil-A. And a lot of that is training and an intentional amount of investing in an employee so they feel equipped, so they understand here's how we do things. That's ultimately cultures. Here are the behaviors that have become a standard. This is what we're going to allow to be repeated in our organization. This is the way we do things. And I think that's something that absolutely translates into every other industry. And if you'll take care of your people and they feel that they're a part of something larger than themselves, that they care about, and they care about and understand and appreciate the people they're working with to achieve that goal, I think that creates obviously engagement, but that sense of the customer being taken care of and the customer being treated specially is almost always a symptom of the employee feeling special and recognized for being something that is special in its own right, in terms of being part of a team that has clarified their values, that has clarified here's how we do things. And I think that absolutely, if you take care of your people take care of your clients.
Very good. Very interesting. So I know you talked about a little of your background, Sean, on a basketball side. So if how did you get involved in a leadership and a team building? If you talk about a little bit of your background, how do you come to writing books and getting so expert at these couple of subjects?
Very unexpected background kind of path that I took into the speaking and facilitation and writing that I do now. I was for over 2 decades a high school literature teacher and basketball coach. And it is as a basketball coach that obviously I got engaged and involved with what it means to change and grow and improve and really be intentional about building and sustaining a team culture. Because I had gone in, as I mentioned, to you in our previous conversation, I'd gone into my first job completely focused upon strategy, thinking that my research and my preparation in terms of the X's and O's and strategic side was going to be the difference maker. And I was all kinds of, enthusiastic and excited and full of all kinds of expectations and face planted my first year, because strategy is always going to either be supported by or sabotaged by your culture. And when I neglected our culture, our strategy obviously suffered. And so that was the beginning of my kind of journey into becoming an expert on workplace culture and what you can actually do as a leader to build an environment where people can thrive and overachieve instead of underachieve.
Very interesting. Yeah, I know, definitely. It's your books, that same message in your books. I can see that, the work you've been doing, very interesting. So thank you. I want to acknowledge your time, Sean. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Definitely, business leaders, my colleagues who are, I'm sure they've taken a lot of value away from our discussion, but I will encourage all of them to, we all business leaders, including myself, we come from technical background or some sort of background. We got a blind spot and we don't know what the blind spot are. So that's where we need people like you to first of all, help us see those blind spots and then help us achieve, get over those things so we can achieve what we want to achieve in life, whether it's business, whether it's personal life or team building. So, I definitely encourage business leaders to go, listen to this, they've gone through this video, go check out your books, get a copy of your books and reach out to you for conversation. Connect with you, reach out to you for conversation. I learned so much from our discussion. I'm sure business leaders, when they reach out to you, they're going to learn so much as well. So I'll definitely encourage people to, reach out to you. So I want to acknowledge your time. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Where can people find you, Sean, and how can they connect with you?
Thank you so much for asking. And again, I would be honored to be a resource for not just you, but certainly for your audience of leaders. You can find me online at greatresultsteambuilding.com. I also have a website, effectiveleaders.live, because obviously team building and teamwork and culture are all going to ultimately be that kind of symptom of leadership. And so developing better leaders and accelerating their growth and shortening their path to effective is something that I've really focused on recently. You can find me on LinkedIn at Sean Glaze, and all of my books are available on Amazon. If I can be of service to you or your team in any capacity as a speaker or facilitator or as a coach, please know that I would be absolutely honored to have a conversation to see how we might work together.
Yeah, I checked out some of your, presentations, some of your talks. Very interesting, especially your team building exercises. A lot of interesting stuff there. I think it's essential for as we going back to hybrid environment, whether we're going back in office. The work you do is so important for people to scale their teams and get connected people, because we missed last few years having this human to human connection. So it's so important for people to reach out to you and connect and just go back to connecting people and as we talked about, and getting back into business.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. We enjoyed the opportunity to share.
Thank you. I learned so much, Sean. Thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye.